Hello and welcome to John James Live. My name is John Hastings with my co-host, Mr. James Silo. And today, James, we're going to discuss the trials and tribulations of parenting. You're a big daddy, James, aren't you?
Of three
adult children.
Three adult children.
You've been through the mill, but you're not a grandpa yet.
No. You're supposed to say you don't look old enough.
Yeah, no, but you do. When did you start?
I shouldn't have to prompt you and things like that. It should just be like the seamless reaction of just saying, James, you don't look old enough, mate. How can you be possibly the father of three grown-up children? I'm going to have to do the heavy lifting.
I've got a family member, James. I'm not sure I'm not going to say who it is, but they were a grandparent at age 31.
I'm trying to work that out. I'm trying to work it out.
Yeah. Say you have a kid at 15 and that kid has a kid at 16. It's quite something.
Young, that is.
I don't know what the lessons would be for that parenting.
Is that
I guess that was normal. That would have been normal.
Hereditary behavior. Yeah, I mean, I know that my kids. I think it was my daughter's class. There was a girl there that was pregnant. I think she was 15, may have even been 14. You think? Wow!
Yeah.
Wow!
Sounds young, but I guess normal for most of human history, wouldn't it be?
Yeah,
I know it's different nowadays, but I guess
it's a relatively modern construct, isn't it? It's
you wouldn't have lived that long, would you? If you lived to 40, you would have been lucky. So you would have been a grandparent potentially. But no, we'll discuss parenting, of our experiences with parenting. I've got children. You've got children. Mine are teenage. Yours are adults now. So we've been through the mill. But thinking about the future, what would it be like as grandparents as well? What would we advise them? Would we give them any advice, or have we got any good advice? What have we learned from our parents, and what would we potentially do differently as dads bringing up our kids? So we'll start off, James. It's hard, but what in terms of what you learned first of all from your parents that you took into parenthood, what sort of lessons would you take from that experience?
Well, first and foremost, I didn't have much of a relationship with my father. He left when I was very young. So I didn't really have a great role model in terms of what it was to be a father. And then I had a stepfather who, it's a tricky one because, we did things together. He involved me in stuff. He was very much a disciplinarian. So we weren't allowed to put our elbows on the table, no hands in pockets. It was that sort of growing up in the 70s, 80s, where kids were kind of looked on as being seen and not heard. That sort of attitude. And I've parented my children very differently, I think. And where I didn't have much stability in my childhood growing up, we moved around. I calculated probably about 26 times we moved house and weren't in houses for very long. So like 6-month rentals, a couple of years, maybe max. So lots of disruption and lack of stability, and then being at private school and boarding. But it was, and I remember making my own bed at a very young age, like sort of 6 years old. And then my eldest son at sort of 14, 15, not knowing how to put a duvet cover on.
Yeah.
And it was, my childhood experience was very different to my kids. So it was my sort of mission, I guess, to give my children, I tried to, as much as I could, and possibly overcompensated, to give them the most stable childhood. We're in the same house for about 19 years. And possibly, as I said, went the other way to give them what I didn't have. So there's always that factor into the equation of going so far the other way that actually that in itself is poor parenting.
It can backfire, can't it? You overcompensate to an extreme. That's what extremes do sometimes, don't they? If you have extreme circumstances, you go the opposite direction. It can be, if you wrap your kids in cotton wool, they end up, struggling in different areas, don't they?
Yeah.
So it's very tricky. But you can, I suppose, with all parents, they say, the question is like, how have you messed your kids up? Nobody's perfect. So it's sort of understanding yourself, the context of your parents' situation at the time. I guess your parents as kids didn't grow up thinking, I want to be a terrible parent, or I want to involve myself in complex situations that make my life really hard. No one really grows up thinking that they want to do that, but life evolves, doesn't it? So you sort of got to see yourself and parents with a lot of context, haven't you, James?
Yeah, and I constantly have these conversations with people. I said, you don't know what it is to be a parent until you become one. You don't have the concept of the fallibility of the human person. And, none of us know really what we're doing. We're just trying to do the best we can.
Yeah.
And a throwaway comment in the heat of the moment can be devastating to a child. But as the parent, you've forgotten about it within seconds because, something you said or something you did. But to the child, it's lasted long in the memory. And, their memory of their childhood and your memory as a parent are very, very different. And that's where the conflict can come, that, you've got a child there saying, well, you did this or you said that, and I wanted to go here and you wouldn't take me. And, I just wanted to be heard and you weren't listening. So, there's all of that to take into consideration, that the impact of what you say and do, but it's impossible at every moment of the day.
Yeah.
To factor that in, to think, well, should I say that? Should I not? Because, it just paralyzes you and you don't do anything. Yeah. But, I think...
How would you know, James, as well? At the time, you're like doing your best in the moment.
Yeah.
Just, even when your parents, even if you've had like a terrible, traumatic childhood, you sort of think, what could have changed? What could have been different? A lot of the times is just environments and contexts set themselves up where it was difficult, wasn't it, for all people involved? It was hard to go back and say, oh, you could have changed one thing, because if hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it, to go back and say I would have, should have, could have.
And I think now, where we have so much information available to us in regards to neurodivergency, ADHD, autism. We never really had that when my kids were little. It was there, but you had to go looking for it. It wasn't as readily available, that information. You could just kind of do a Google search, or there was somebody on social media that was labeling themselves, dare I say it, as neurodivergent, and you could then get an insight and then draw the parallels with what was going on in your children's lives. So we didn't have that tool available. So when I look back, I try not to be too hard on myself or, on my wife, that we just didn't have the knowledge. We didn't have the tools. And when a child is presenting as being willful and disobedient and naughty, you deal with it as your parents dealt with it, or you approach it in a way in which, you were told to stop being naughty, don't be rude. When somebody talks to you, you talk back, you make eye contact.
Yeah.
But you haven't got the knowledge or the awareness or the experience to know that actually if a child isn't making eye contact or doesn't talk when they're spoken to, it's not necessarily the fact that they're being naughty. It's in fact the direct opposite. You know, it could be social anxiety, it could be disassociation, all those sort of things. So, you know, I look back and it upsets me when I think about those moments, but also I can, I guess, soothe myself with the fact that, you know, we didn't know any better. And we were just dealing with what was being presented at that time. But I've had conversations with them all since and have apologized for my behavior because, you know, there's behaviors that I'm not proud of. I mean, I was certainly never violent towards them or, you know, abusive in any way, shape or form, but I could have handled lots of situations better had I have had the understanding and the awareness and, you know, but circumstantially, personally, where I was at emotionally, you know, I hadn't done any work on myself back then. Having children young, there was anger on my part. I think it's one of those things, I don't know if you've ever thought of it in these terms of your children being almost a kind of a mirror of you and the elements of yourself that you don't necessarily like that are being reflected back at you through your children. You don't want that for your children because you know how it makes you feel. And so you respond very emotionally because it's triggering. And they don't understand why you're acting the way you're acting. They're just being who they are. But it's this sort of microcosm of your personality, the element, the aspect of you that's being sort of pumped out into the ether that is being absorbed by your children, and they take their cues from their parents and from adults. And if they see you acting in a particular way, they'll mimic that, they'll take their lead. And then you just get this, you know, backwards and forwards in terms of that behavior. And you think, well, me as an adult, I should know better. I should be behaving better. And if now I've got a child who's, you know, behaving as a reflection of me, now I can see it. But in the heat of the moment, it's very, very hard.
Difficult. Yeah, it really exposes sort of cracks in, I don't know, your own self-development, doesn't it? Because it sort of exposes the relationship you've got with yourself and your partner as well, because now you've got a different focus in a relationship, so your relationship dynamic will completely change. And if you haven't really got that understanding, you know, it can go a bit pear-shaped, can't it? Even if people that stay together, it can be a huge dysfunction during those times. And if you haven't got family support as well during those times, the dynamics and the context are so complex that you can see how it can easily go. When I say when things can go wrong, I'm not really sure what I mean by that, because sometimes you have people with very dysfunctional backgrounds. They have, you know, quite stable mentalities, don't you? And they go on to do great things in the world, and you know, it builds their character. Sometimes they come from superficially that look quite stable upbringing, and it goes a bit sideways. So there's just
I don't know
there's
any template, hard and fast kind of rules that you can
apply.
But it's interesting just thinking when you were talking about you know, the family dynamic and the partnership, and you'll have known, and I've certainly known people that have stayed together in unhappy marriages because of the children or for the sake of the children. It would be that's the reason why we stay together, because of the children. And, you know, this is no judgment either way. But you think about the environment that kids are growing up in. If the parents are constantly arguing, or there's apathy between, there's clearly no love between the two of them, and the impact that has on the children, and what that's showing them for what relationships should look like. Again, like I said, taking their cues from their parents. It's a tricky and impossible one to sort of comment on in respect of. My one sense is that, is it better to separate and have two happy parents that are separated, or to have seemingly stability of not, having two parents living separately, two households, other partners coming into that situation, whether you're same sex, different sex, whatever that looks like, it's just a thing to think about, isn't it, in that respect of, because it's all on an individual basis, that if you can make it work and it's a healthy environment for the kids to be growing up in, then fantastic. But if it's not, if it's toxic and, it's a loveless household, then you've got to consider what effect and impact that has on the kids.
Because the kids are absorbing that, aren't they? They're going to see there's no love in that relationship. They're going to feel the tension. You might think it's doing the kids good, but even the pretense, a lot of kids will pick it up subconsciously anyway, won't they? To feel that it's not working. And I guess you definitely can make it work if you're not together. It's 100% possible. I guess when my dad sort of left when I was 5, and sort of not seen him since. But then I think to myself, when I hear stories of what he was like after he'd left with his other children, I'm like, it probably did me a favor. It could have been a lot worse.
Yeah. There's that,
to be honest,
that sort of comparison. So
yeah,
go into that then, the fact that you didn't have that, your biological father, so we're fairly similar in lots of different respects. So you didn't have that as a guide. You didn't have that to, either way, good or bad. You didn't have that as a reference point for what it was to be a father. How did that impact you, do you think?
I had a very good granddad. So I did have a father figure to step into that role up until the age of 18. He passed, so I probably did have quite a stable view of relationship. My nan and granddad were together for their whole life.
That was your paternal or maternal grandparents?
Maternal. Yeah. So on that side, both sets of grandparents have been together, forever. There's only one left now. But that was observing a very stable relationship, I would say. So I did have the view of that stability, and we did live quite close by. But in terms of a father, then there was no, there was no father figure there. But hearing stories,
and you relate
about
to
it,
that relationship now, that stability, the fact that they were together all of their married life. I mean, or do you look at it? Do you look at it in terms of the quality of the relationship, or in context of the age that they were living in? That divorce and separation was sometimes not an option, but certainly frowned upon, and the social elements very, very different to now. So what's your sort of concept of that relationship, do you think?
Yeah, I think with my grandparents, they seemed, I couldn't really understand at the time, but looking back and from the stories, they was actually very close. So they sort of lived for each other, had 3 children. When my nan died 10 years before my granddad died, he was lost. His head was gone, after that. It's like removing a limb pretty much when she died. So it shows that they pretty much lived for each other since the early 20s all the way till mid 70s, 80s. So it was quite a long innings. I guess they've been through a lot, world wars, different jobs, moving around, children. And so I don't know. I don't really know. There's probably skeletons in the closet somewhere on that side that I don't know of. I think they had a child quite late. They had my mum quite late in their 40s, so that was probably
Yeah,
unexpected for
that
them.
makes a difference. Yeah.
It makes a big difference, yeah, the timing of the kids. But I probably learned a lot from that side. And then my own personal side was just pure dysfunction. You know, depressed mum, alcoholic dad, violence, living in what I now would see as poverty, but not that bad because it was sort of 80s, 90s. It was still, everybody was in it, so it was absolutely fine.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, dysfunctional stepdad sort of scenario. So I would say, but even with that, there was things that, you know, discipline was quite good with stepdad. There was a lot of things that were positives along with the sort of negative emotional side. So I definitely took a lot of positives. Mum was very hardworking, you know, took me to cleaning jobs, that type of stuff, sort of built her way up, got a stability. There was never any chaos in my house. It was always very, it was more stonewalling. So it
Yeah.
wasn't a
It's
house
the
full of
emotional
shouting.
instability as opposed to.
Yeah. But then you become quite independent because you find I love school. So that was, I
Yeah.
got a lot of love from that. So it's completely different, isn't it, for different kids? Where some people you grow up and they say, look, homeschooling is the way forward because school's a waste of time. What do you think on that?
Yeah, no, but before I go into that, I was just thinking in terms of the stonewalling and you then going to seek that potentially elsewhere if you weren't getting that from home. Because I know you were going, you had that friendship network and going to other people's houses and seeing how they were living and the comparison to your own experience. Did you feel like, did that amplify what was happening at home in respect of that stonewalling? You could see how how your friends were interacting with their parents or they were interacting with your friends.
To be honest, everyone's was dysfunctional.
Was it?
I didn't really see any.
There was no
even
stark
when
difference between
no,
your
even when I
experience and
moved
theirs.
even going to college in a posher area, and then seeing some of the other parents, I thought, oh Jesus, this is worse. Even though they got money, some of it was worse than mine. I was like, oh my God, this is this looks terrible.
Yeah.
They had the money there, but the dysfunction on their side, I would say, was quite heavy as well. I can't remember. I'm trying to think of anybody where I thought, oh yeah, that looks good.
Yeah. It was a friend of mine, very, very good, friend of mine from a very early age, and his parents are separated as well. And I go around their house, and his father and his partner and his mother and the stepfather would all be there having dinner together. And I'd be there going, this is just astonishing. Do people actually live like this? Do they, is that even a possibility that when parents separate, that you can have this level of frivolity and sort of cohesion in this unit?
Yeah.
Because I had completely the opposite. So that was, but then speaking to him sort of fairly recently, what you saw on the surface wasn't what was the case.
Wasn't what was happening, yeah.
But from a child's perspective, it looked like utopia. It's like, bloody hell, you can have everything. You can have two sets of parents that actually talk to each other, and it seemed like it, the best of both worlds. He had two parents that loved him, and had houses that he could go to, and in your naive mind of going, well, bloody hell, he gets two lots of Christmas presents, and what a lucky kid. But it was only, as I said, very, very recently we had a conversation. It was like, no, it wasn't like that at all. There was, abuse and violence and all sorts going on, but you bury that and you just don't know. You have no idea what's going on underneath the surface.
That would be the same for any guys we speak to, isn't it, James? There's what you see on the surface.
Very rarely what's going on underneath. We
if
just
anybody
get very,
says,
very good.
Yeah. When people say I had a really good childhood, my alarm bells are ringing. I was like, no, there's something off. Because you're messed up. Something's off.
I mean, I don't know. I've got so there's a client of mine who's in his 80s, bless him, and he's his parents were from the Isle of Skye and had a very, very traditional upbringing, very community orientated. Go up there, and certainly his mother's, I think it was his mother's side, I think it was his mother's side of the family were very tactile, very cuddly, and bearing in mind he's 82, but just had the most on the surface idyllic childhood. Never saw his parents argue. Just he was never aware of anything untoward, and would completely the opposite to what I'd described. He couldn't believe that when he went to friends' houses that their parents didn't like each other or were arguing. Yeah. Because it was just so alien as a concept to him. So you kind of, and he's very laid back, and he's just, he's such a lovely guy. But that's the exception to the rule, isn't it? This isn't something that necessarily is, but those kind of unicorns seemingly do exist.
They must be out there, mustn't they? They've got to be. Let's see, Mr. Toby, my man. I need to bounce, but I think of all what you have said and does or should resonate with any parent that wants to get on top of this topic. It's individual and subjective, and no one's story is the same as someone else. Exactly right. So the guidance may or may not be right, but it comes from a good place. It's a positive message. Cheers. Cheers, Toby. Yeah, Toby's.
So caveat this is our lived experience. This is not advice in any way, shape, or form.
That's the thing. There's no there is no wrong or right, isn't there? That's when then we go on to what advice would we give to our kids. Have you got a set of principles or things that you would change? Because we said we had a little disagreement, didn't we, before about it was like we both got daughters, and I said, and you said about getting them to leave the house to give them independence, and I was saying, no, I don't. I would prefer the daughters to live with you forever.
Yeah,
and be a family unit. So is there things that you've changed your mind on, or would you give your, kids certain pieces of advice? What would you say?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one again, because your situation is different to mine. And I've got this thing about them having their own independence, and it's that kind of, it's not even tough love, because that's just a crap term. But, I do believe that, they have to have a level of resilience that they can fend for themselves, because I see that as a form of abuse if you do everything for them and they have no concept of what it is to struggle a bit and have to think for themselves, get themselves out of situations that they're not just then on the phone saying, oh, Dad, but that's not to say that we haven't been in that situation. Yes, I've gone and picked them up, helped them out, and, paid for stuff, and absolutely 100%. So, there was never that sort of thing of just, right, go sink or swim. It's down to you. I think, again, this is my personal perspective, is that the best that I can do, so this is me, this is not a comment generally, is to allow them to have some level of failure without it being catastrophic. if they can have just small things that they've had to go away and think about and come up with a solution for, fend for themselves in certain ways, or take responsibility for stuff, then, I kind of feel like, that's my remit, really. That if I then step in every single stage through ego, through just caring too much, or, and it is hard, don't get me wrong, it's hard to go, well, what can you do about it? I've obviously, I can advise and I can say, look, well, but I'll ask them questions about, have you looked at that? Have you tried that? And, if that hasn't worked, and then, well, let's see if we can figure out a solution together. But just going in and sort of just fixing everything, I think, generally as blokes, that's kind of how we're programmed, that it doesn't necessarily do the child any favors. What if I'm not around? What if I'm somewhere else and I'm just not available?
Yeah. And then you think, James, when I'm giving advice, or you're thinking of giving advice, I start to think, who am I to give advice? Am I 10 out of 10 on finance? Am I 10 out of 10 on relationships? Am I 10 out of 10 on the context of this situation?
Yeah, totally.
Am I leading by demonstration, or am I, pushing an agenda that
or projecting what you would like to be, as opposed to who you actually are? Yeah, and again, that's a confusing message to put out into the world. It's like, well, but I'll very, often say to them, look, I'm not the best person to ask about that.
It is, yeah, which I think is a sensible one, because even if you've got a great job in financial security, you might hate your life and hate your job, and then you're advising somebody to get into finance because they've got security, but you might hate your life again. So it's just very difficult, isn't it, to give anybody any real advice. I think what is nice, even again, this is contradictory, I'm jealous of my friends who have got rich parents. There's a part of me that envies the security of some type of inheritance,
right?
And the fact that they can always go back, like they can take a risk and know that at the end of the day, yeah, it's like for your kids, they could take a risk. At the end of the day, they can always come back home.
Yeah,
and I really envy that. But then I speak to them, and they say, "No, that's not good for me. It's made me into a certain person that I'm over reliant on that. So I haven't got the urgency. I haven't built up certain skills, which has made me weak in certain areas, because I know that that net's there. Yeah. Which has changed me fundamentally." So
yeah. I mean, I think for me, like I can sort of be, all sort of supercilious and, self-congratulatory, but I mean, the fundamentals are that I haven't been in a position economically, to help them as I would want to. And I guess that's been a sort of double-edged sword, that, they've had to figure this. They just haven't had, we can help them in a small way, but, in terms of day-to-day survival, they've got to pay for themselves. They have to have jobs. I can't afford to support them on a daily basis, to pay the rent and, food bills and telephone bills and stuff like that. It's beyond my capability. So it's out of necessity as opposed to, but then, even when they were little, it was really to sort of show them the meaning of possessions and to value that. And they knew, both of us are working jobs. My wife worked a job, I worked a job, even, when they were little. She did shift work and stuff like that. So they've always had that awareness that things just don't appear. That there's a means to achieving this. And, they had little part-time jobs when they were younger, and we encouraged that. And I think you know, from what they've said as well, it gave them that sense of pride that they could, you know, if they wanted to go and buy something, they could. They didn't have to come to me to ask for it. They could go and get that themselves. So I think we maybe, you know, we don't necessarily think of that. And I remember feeling like that as well. The first time I took my mum for, you know, a burger at Burger King. And it was just that, you know, feeling, it's almost like a rite of passage to just go and say, hand over the money. Yeah, and for her to go, oh, you know, this is great, isn't it? My son's taking me out. But as small as that was, it still had, you know, that emotional thing for me.
Because I think the men who have, you know, parents, I know a lot of guys with rich parents, there is many occasions where it can be sort of emasculating to feel like you can't really survive by yourself. You're either living off your mum's support, or maybe you're living in your dad's shadow, which can be quite hard if your dad's been quite successful. That is, it's not that you don't, it's not an easy path, is it? If you've got a successful father and you're the, I know a lot of kids who are, well, they're not kids now, they're adults, but they're a bit depressed. Yeah, and externally you think, oh man, your dad's done amazing. He's built this up from nothing. Yeah. But that was his journey.
Yeah, totally.
No, and that was his journey.
Like, for, you know, generationally speaking, when you talk about sort of generational trauma, and, you know, my grandparents' upbringing was not my mother's upbringing. And my upbringing was not my mother's upbringing. And, you know, my upbringing was not my kids' upbringing. You know, none of my children have gone to boarding school. None of them have been sort of, you know, it sounds dramatic, but sort of ripped out of the family unit and deposited in boarding school, which is what it felt like at the time, is that sort of being sort of forcibly removed and deposited. And then
would we put a category and say that's not a good thing, or would we still put context on the, you know,
it depends on the child, you know, what their home life was like. I mean, my memories of my home life was good. It was comfortable. You know, my stepfather had money, so we had a nice lifestyle. But I remember the excitement of, because I boarded from probably the age of 5 or 6, and then had about a year or two at home, and then back to boarding school at the age of 11. So, you know, I had a comfortable home life, but I can assume, and again, it's only an assumption, that if you didn't have a comfortable home life, then actually going to boarding school would be blessed relief. You know, if you were treated well and, you know, you were fed regularly and there was structure there and you could make friends, I'm pretty bloody sure that there's kids that have thrived in that environment. So it's very much down to the individual. So you can't then sort of throw a blanket over it and say that boarding is bad. It wasn't great for me. Again, that's the only comment that I can have. But I'm sure, like I said, if you had a pretty poor home life, that would have represented something more attractive.
Yeah, you're right. It's like a close friend of mine, and his parents have had money. They didn't always have money, but he hated school. He just hated it, everything about it. You know, it just wasn't a good experience for him. Whereas I really didn't mind it, to be honest. I quite liked it. It was a lot of sport,
your salvation,
wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. I was naturally good at memorizing, so it wasn't a massive issue at school. He got a lot of praise, a lot of love. So, and I was never bullied, which is also a huge thing.
Huge.
You know,
that's another factor.
If you're a kid and you're bullied, it's a nightmare environment, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think my eldest was, but he is very different in respect of his, you know, neurodivergency. to my youngest, and again, sort of found out when he was that bit older that he was being bullied at school as well, and had a lot of elements of that in terms of his behavior and gaming, and that we didn't realize at the time. We just thought it was the addictive nature of the games that he was playing.
It was
But
escapism.
his escapism.
Yeah, that is the difficult part. I think I don't know, what things would you say you're proud of, James, as a father? What have you feel like you've done right that you feel is a good thing that you would sort of encourage your children to do with their children?
Yeah, I think the kids have always known that I'm dependable and I'd be there.
Yeah,
That's
the same with me, I think.
Like, if ever they needed
me, if they pick up
me,
the phone, they know that you're going to answer. That can't be underestimated, to be honest. Even if there's a financial, a dad who's like a financier, giving them loads of money. Those type of people sometimes you can never get hold of. They're not emotionally available.
Like moving house or doing stuff. If they need me, I'm there in that respect. And I think certainly more lately, I'm able to listen as opposed to jumping in with advice. I can kind of go in almost a kind of coaching mode of asking questions, as opposed to, well, you need to do this, this, and this. You need to is always a challenging.
Is that a new thing that you brought in the last 5 years?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think it is relatively probably the last sort of maybe 5 years or so that I can kind of take a step back, really.
They was already adults by that point.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
that's something.
And just be there to talk. And you can always be better at that. You can always, but I do periodically check in with them. It's that thing, I haven't spoken to, one of them in a little while, and I'll just send them a message, say, look, just checking in with you. How you doing? Yeah, it's all right, Dad. Yeah, I'm good. So it's a sort of, you spin that plate, keep that going, and then the next one, spin that plate, and then just make sure you can just try to keep them in a holding pattern almost, or just be happy that they're in a holding pattern at the moment. There's no sort of major dramas. There's, kind of ripples and things like that. You sort of address that, sort that out, or you talk that through rather. And then, there's the next one that, perhaps they're moving in with a partner, or there's something they're not sort of 100% sure about. And you say, okay, well, talk me through that and things like that. So yeah, that's, I guess I've achieved possibly what I wanted to set out consciously, subconsciously, is to give them stability. And talking to them, I think they would say that they had a, stable childhood.
Yeah.
There were bumps in the road, absolutely, separated for a short period of time, but came back together. And during that separation, I was there 3-4 times a week. So it was never that thing that they didn't get to see me. We tried to make that as seamless as possible whilst we were figuring things out. But I think those are the things I'm most proud of. But like I said, that it's punctuated by behaviors that I'm not proud of.
Yeah. There are big things, aren't there? You're sort of becoming a dad that you sort of never had. You're trying to be a little bit better.
Yeah, my role models were not great. We're not great
exactly.
At all.
So if you compare them to what you had, it's never going to be perfect. But you could say, okay, I've tried to take a step in a better direction here, which can be tough.
Yeah, I mean, not going into the sort of details of my childhood, but I think the fact that I've managed to get to where I am now, I'm, probably, I don't give myself enough credit for that. When you think about actually what could have happened and how south it could have gone. The fact that I'm still here as a functional human being, still alive, with 3 children that actually quite like me.
It's
And
not been,
still with
you've
my
done
wife,
all right.
in terms of achievement, I think that's pretty much up there, you know.
That's how I feel compared to my upbringing. For me to be, not an alcoholic, not on drugs, I don't know. It's not bad, to be fair.
Yeah, I quite like spending
Probably
time with you, mate. So that's, that's always a good indicator.
it's an upgrade, but I would say, yeah, it is that being there. I think each of us have got different skill sets, haven't we? So like listening, just being reliable, that's quite a big quality to have, that reliability. Like my kids
Yeah,
always know if they pick up the phone, or I always try to call them, even if they don't respond. They always know when they call, I'm always there. So that's quite
yeah,
a big thing. But I'm like you, economically, I would definitely want to improve that situation to give more. I think it's
just yeah,
probably is different for daughters than sons, isn't it? I guess there is a probably difference in the way you would treat each one. I guess the sons, you're happier for them to get their knees bruised and to sort of get out there, get after it in a competitive world. But for daughters, I don't know how you feel, but sometimes I feel, well, I wish
yeah.
I could do
I
more.
have an awareness around that, and that gender stereotyping of, I want them all to, fundamentally, I want them to be happy, fulfilled, happy. That's the extent of my desire for them in respect of, what they do financially, in terms of changing the world, whatever. I want them to be happy and fulfilled. Whatever that looks like, that's entirely up to them. And I consider it fundamentally wrong for anybody to interfere based on what they think success looks like, or what, they consider to be successful, or what they can be proud of. I'm proud whatever my children do.
Yeah.
I'm proud of who they are as, as a people, and the way they treat other people. That's the ultimate. That's the only thing for me. But question for you is, if you had your time again, what would you do regards to schooling? Would you school at home? Would you look for an alternative? Would you have done the same thing? What would be your perspective looking back in hindsight?
For my kids or for me?
For your kids?
For kids, I probably wouldn't have changed a thing. I would say I'm not the best teacher. I know myself. I've tried it, even doing homework. I haven't got that much patience. I find it a bit frustrating. I don't think it's a good role for me to take on personally.
Yeah.
But then again, with the education system, in terms of what they're learning, some of it fantastic. You're getting your fundamentals in. You're learning, how to survive in different dynamics with different children, different teachers, how to adapt. Giving yourself some structure and discipline. I know in this day and age, parents need to go to work, and that sort of facilitates you being able to do that. In terms of what you learn in school, I personally don't think I've really learned any real fundamental life skills or anything of great relevance that helped me at all in life. I didn't really learn about housing and finance, or business, or how the economy is working, or how relationships work, or what marriage is, or I didn't really learn anything that was really to do with life. And I reckon it probably would have been better for me to just do 2, 3, 4 different apprenticeships for 2 for 2 years each, rather than
Yeah.
be sat in a class. At least you come out with some fundamental skills.
Yeah.
Rather than, if you're not good at memorizing, which is not a good thing sometimes, because short-term memory can be really good, which you can pass tests, but you don't necessarily retain the information. So it's a tricky one. And then people associate learning with pain. I have to pass this test, otherwise my life's over. You're not really learning, are you? In that sense, you're sort of fear-based education, I don't think, is a good way forward.
It's factual regurgitation, isn't it?
So I understand a lot of, I've got friends that are doing homeschooling, fair play to them. A lot of the wealthy people now are taking their kids out of mainstream schooling. You've got AI now that can help supplement with education. So, I
mean, that would be an interesting concept. Well, I think that almost like a hybrid model where you've got, the timetable is now like a 50-50 split, that you could have more dedicated to. I was just thinking, actually, whilst you were talking about, did woodwork at school, made stuff with your hands, you constructed practical things, bird boxes and cheese boards and all that kind of stuff that still my mother still has, she kept. But you were using dangerous stuff and you had a respect for that, even though it was like a handsaw or something like that, or a plane. You felt, again, when we were talking about rites of passage, that you felt adult using tools that I'd seen my grandfather use. So those kind of practical skills, definitely some sort of basic economics to understand how the world of finance works, how banks work. When you pay money into a bank account, what they do with the money, what a dividend is, what shares are, government bonds, all of those kind of things, and the implications of that. But, again, you can use your conspiracy theorist head and say that, the government doesn't want you to necessarily think along those lines, that they need a compliant workforce, which I understand, and it's not going to be, entrepreneurship isn't for everybody, but at least you've got the fundamentals that if that's the percentage APR, what impact that's going to have on your, final amount at the end of each year. So
and you can't underestimate like an inspirational teacher either. You could have the same subject and a completely different person who's teaching it, and somebody can really
totally different thing. But if you can have
energy,
like that hybrid model where you've got, everything that AI can now offer. So in terms of time saving, or the amount that kids can do in their own time, and then the beauty of exactly that, of having an inspirational adult that has the time and the interest and the availability to be able to teach in that way, that they're not constantly up against it. They're being, held to account by targets and quotas and all, those sort of things, that they could then teach that and have a double period of something that would really enrich the lives of children and give them the foundation of what they need to be able to survive in the world. Like going out and building something in the woods, foraging, those kind of, I think, that would be utopia, I think, for my children going back. Yes, it wouldn't look like homeschooling, because I'm exactly the same. I wouldn't have the patience or the aptitude to do it. The finances, etc. But for them to go out and learn practical skills and skills that would set them up. And you could argue that, as a parent, that's something that you could do. Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
But they spend a lot of time at school. So if that could be an enhancement of what you could do as a parent as well, or a continuation, and I don't know, you can compensate the social skills, the fact that they are interacting with each other as well, you know, the kind of team building element, and having to navigate each other, personality types, is crucial. And I think potentially that's something that could be lacking if you were to, you know, homeschool them on their own. You know, yes, there's play dates and stuff like that, you know, but I think that level of interaction in nature is hugely beneficial for kids.
I think so. Yeah, I know. Like the Simon Squibb is really against sort of mainstream education, isn't he? He's homeschooling his kid. I've got people from abroad as that I know as well that have to do compulsory national service in the army if you're a guy. There's talk about, you know, would that be good for the next generation to do some sort of army training?
Yeah.
Would it be good to live on a farm for a year and have that experience to learn how food's made? And
well, I was reading about Singapore actually, and the changes from about the mid 1960s and social structure, because they were struggling economically, socially, but national service was introduced, and you know, the social cohesion as well that was integrated into society that then enabled them to start to thrive. So it's really interesting when you look at different sort of models, and yes, you have to take into account the cultural element, and the necessity for it, that they were, you know, they were ripe. It takes the right leader to come in and implement it and get everybody behind it and on board and all that sort of thing. So it's not as easy as just saying, yep, you know, we should have national service and etc. And that will solve every problem. Clearly it won't. There's lots of different elements, but it's just interesting to look at how other societies have implemented certain things, and the you know, there's going to be downsides for sure. You know, you can't look at it through rose-tinted glasses, but it's just a, you know, a thing of looking at it and seeing what's worked and what hasn't worked. It's just an interesting, you know, concept.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? As long as it's just training and not actually going to war, that becomes a problem, isn't it? When it becomes real, it's like, it's good to do national service if there's no war.
Yeah, the basis of it is looking out for each other, isn't it? It's looking after each other.
Yeah.
You know, if you're reliant on somebody,
routine, community. I guess you might get that, you know, growing crops on the farm, or you did it in the national service, or you went to a house building.
Yeah, I don't know that it matters what form it comes in, as long as there's those elements there that, you know, will galvanize or to allow individuals to make those emotional bonds.
Yeah.
And have some self-worth.
Yeah. So we've come to the conclusion that we haven't really got much advice, have we, James, on this lessons thing? It's so contextual. I would say people will say, yeah, I'll tell my kids to do this or do that, but you know, in this life, you got to learn the lessons. This day and age is totally different from 30 years ago. You know, what do you learn now? If you're going to become a doctor in 10 years' time, is there going to be AI doctors? You're going to be made redundant? Who knows? It's so up in the air that it's hard to give advice. Really, probably get good at learning, be curious, try a lot of things, be good at networking.
I think it'll be about relationships.
Skills.
I think, you know, and that's when you look at it, and if you take a fairly jaundiced view, you'll say that that's the thing that we're going to struggle with most, is interpersonal relationships. Because if we're only having those interactions online, and even with AI, where does that leave us as human beings if we can't communicate with each other or have that emotional connection? Because, you know, if the old adage is true, is that people buy from people, and it's not necessarily the product, it's the, you know, the story behind it. are we going to stop caring about that and just, I don't know, but there will be an adaptation for sure. So, well, I think the humanity has to be preserved at all costs.
Yeah, I think what you said halfway through, James, I think is a big point when you said, look, you will be honest and say, I don't know if I'm the best person to give you this advice. I think just having some self-awareness and being honest about if you're projecting your fears onto your kids and telling them they've got to do this, and you're giving them, there's no context to it.
Yeah.
You know, you're thinking what you did 30 years ago might not work today.
It's not relevant. You know, that's the thing. It's just realizing the relevancy of it, of knowing that, you know, yes, there may be certain things that they come across that you've come across before that you can head off at the pass for them and say, look, that happened to me. This is how you sort it, you know, and it can be something incredibly simple, but you've just helped them out by fast tracking them to the solution. But, you know, you cannot possibly hope to think that they will understand from your perspective, having never been through that personally, never having known the fear, the trauma, the excitement, the elation of something happening to you that they haven't experienced themselves. And just by you telling them is not going to make that any more of an experience for them. There's empathy, they can listen, but, you know, when it relates to them and their experience, you know, your own personal experience doesn't always cut it.
Yeah, and subjectively, maybe good and bad only exist when you put meaning behind it, isn't it? It's like, it looks bad, but it might be a triple good outcome on the back of this that you don't really know that's going to happen down the line. It might change you in a positive way. If you don't never experience anything bad, then you've got no contrast frame. There's no, if anything's good, isn't it? It's like the rich kid who sort of has access to everything. They sort of value maybe nothing. They don't feel that value. Whereas if you've had nothing, you might be more appreciative in some sense. So it's just a tricky one. We're so on the fence on this, James, aren't we? But maybe that's a skill.
That was slightly clickbaity, you saying parenting lessons no one tells you. It's like people are coming to listen for the answers and then find out very quickly that it's all about
the guru sort of the guru internet thing now is, you know, when people are uncertain, they really want certainty. They want the 5-step to parenting. They want the
just tell me.
3 steps to making incredible decisions. This is what you should be doing. You should not be going to mainstream school. You should run your own business. Your kids should be doing that. It is so contextual. It just depends, doesn't it? I don't know.
And it's
it might work for you. I have no idea.
Case by case basis. And it's about asking questions and listening.
Okay, James. We'll leave it there, sir. You take care of yourself, and I'll speak to you soon.
All right, mate. I'll just zip that up so we look exactly the same before we finish.
Zip it up. We got our dad tops on.
I'll channel my Uncle Fester.
Bye-bye.
Bye.